Foundation, Joel R. Johnson.
Okay, good morning, and welcome back. I hope you all had a lovely break, and we were able to get out to the Sanctuary Cinema there in the exhibition hall, and also to visit some of our sponsors. Thank you all for the comments, too. We're seeing those online. You're sharing pictures, you're sharing your sources of inspiration, and your insights, so keep them coming. You can share your impressions about Capitol Hill Ocean Week so far on social media using the hashtag CHOW 2025, so please stay with us. All right, I'm really excited, very excited about this next panel. Most of my staff, they want to dive in all 18 of our national marine sanctuaries. Me, I would like to fish in all of them. I am a rabid angler who, when I'm not doing this work or spending time with my family, can be found on the water fishing, and legally, and where it is allowed in our sanctuaries. I'm excited about this panel because really we have a unique opportunity to talk about how we can take an all sectors approach to creating better conservation outcomes. And that includes thinking about those users of our public waters and on our coasts and in our oceans, boaters, anglers, kayakers, divers, recreational and commercial anglers, and also, of course, the technological and scientific community that is bringing a lot of innovation to how we do our ocean stewardship and engage those great waters. I want to give a shout out real quickly to the Recreational Boating and Fishing Foundation. This is an organization that has educated really tens of thousands of young people and families across America on how to recreate responsibly, learning how to fish and boat, not just on our coasts, but in the Great Lakes and in the heartland and on our rivers and all kinds of waterways. So just a little shout out to Recreational Boating and Fishing Foundation. Please take a look at their work online if you can. Okay, jumping into the panel. Increasingly, marine industry leaders, including boat builders, engine manufacturers, and marine electronics companies, are partnering with local communities to invest in technologies that support data-driven ocean management and conservation. The $432 billion marine recreation and coastal tourism sector is powered by millions of anglers, boaters, businesses there on the coast, and the communities whose ocean and operations, whose livelihoods are all dependent on the health and accessibility of U.S. waters. So this panel will focus on how innovation across the private sector combined with ocean user engagement is driving improved environmental outcomes from real-time data collection to advanced tools that will really protect marine life. Thank you so much to our session sponsors at Viking Marine Group, Yamaha Motor Corporation, the National Marine Manufacturers Association, Brunswick Corporation, and VIME. We really appreciate your support of this panel. And I am delighted now to introduce the moderator, a fabulous scientist and a brilliant leader, Dr. Holly Bamford. Dr. Bamford is the Chief Conservation Officer for the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, where she is responsible for advancing the foundation's outcome-based approaches to conservation investments, which span various ecosystems, including oceans, coasts, forests, grasslands, and various freshwater environments. Please join me in a very warm welcome to Dr. Bamford.
Whoa, these are, woo, okay, cushy. All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the session. As Joel said, this is going to focus on emerging ocean economies, innovation driving conservation outcomes. My name is Holly Bamford. I am the Chief Conservation Officer of the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, and I'm very pleased to be here. We at the Foundation work very closely with NOAA, as well as our partners here. We really strive to create public-private partnerships around things such as innovation. The purpose of this panel, as we discuss, will focus on those innovations from particularly the private sector as well as ocean users. Right now we're seeing a lot of complex problems in the ocean. We're seeing issues with whale strikes. We're seeing issues of understanding what are the target species and also bycatch issues. And so this affects all of us. This affects industry, it affects government, it affects users, tourism. And so these complex problems really need innovative solutions. And I think that's what we're going to hear about today. I'm really excited because this is purely almost an entirely made-up panel of the private sector, which I've been coming to CHOW for decades, and I think this is a really great movement from Joel and the Sanctuaries Foundation, continuing engaging the private sector in these solutions because they're going to be needed. So a little bit of housekeeping. I'm going to go through the panel format. We'll begin with brief introductions from each of our panelists. We'll give them time to introduce themselves and focus on their area of expertise. Then there'll be an opportunity for questions from the audience, and so please keep your questions concise and relevant, and a staff member will be collecting the question cards, so they'll be on the side. And then from there we'll go into final comments and so forth, and have a wrap-up. So next I'd like to call up our panelists. We'll stay seated, but everybody's going to get a chance to kind of introduce themselves and talk through their expertise. So I'd first like to introduce Anya Denari. She's the EVP and President of Navarco Group and the Chief Technology Officer for Brunswick Corporation.
Great. Thank you so much, Holly, for the introduction, as well as thank you to CHOW for inviting all of us here today to help celebrate our wonderful resources and our nation's love for boating and fishing. A real honor to be here and be part of this event. Quick introduction to me and my company. So I work for Brunswick Corporation. At Brunswick, we have been around for over 100 years, and we are a global leader in recreational marine across the board. So we're about a 5 billion public company, 15,000 employees in 25 countries globally, pretty much exclusively focused on recreational marine. So 4 main divisions. One division that is all of our boat brands, and for those of you who are boaters out there, you probably would recognize some of those, things like Boston Whaler, Sea Ray, Lund, Bayliner, and various other boat brands across the globe. We also own Mercury Marine from a propulsion side of things, and then we have Navico, which is a variety of electronics and other parts and accessories that go into the boat. And then finally, our 4th division is around shared access, which is becoming more and more important as we go forward here. So Freedom Boat Club is a brand where people can have more of a subscription-based model, so still get to enjoy getting out on the water without having the cost and other requirements around boat ownership. I'll just start by saying, we as Brunswick obviously have been in the recreational marine space for a very, very long time. And so conservation and sustainability has been really core to what we've done for a very long time. And that's throughout the life cycle. So I would mention that there have been things that we've been doing for many years in the manufacturing processes. So whether that's things like zero waste to landfill, or reducing the water that we use, or using solar power for electricity, or reducing our emissions in fiberglass manufacturing. And then also we, for a very long time, have had a lot of sustainability actions going on that are going to make the use of our products more sustainable and help conserve the environment. And so as an example there, I would highlight that on the propulsion side, over the last 20 years or so, we have cut emissions by 90%. So that's very significant, and increased fuel economy by about 40% on average. And so a lot of work really around making our products cleaner for the environment and really supporting the conservation efforts. I would say we're also involved in many other ways through foundations, through all the various associations. So Joel mentioned RBFF, there's ASA, there's NMMA, there's CSP. I could provide a long list of acronym industry associations, and together we all support the topics and path forward, which is fantastic for the broader industry. I think the focus today is specifically around technology and electronics as as a driver of further conservation. And so I think it's really great to have this opportunity to showcase a little bit about the collaboration between NGOs, regulators, various different industry associations, as well as the private sector. And so a great example that I think we will probably all touch on here today is this group called WAVES, which is really a transformative model of getting people like NOAA and others involved together with industry to find technology-driven solutions to protect our marine species. And so I know we'll talk a lot more about that here over the course of the next hour or so, but I think for me that's been really groundbreaking as we think about technologies and solutions for kind of warnings, for general information and feedback, as well as then really using the technologies to drive dynamic or real-time information and warnings to our boat users who are out there in the water. And so all of these things together are really enabling us to drive forward the kind of the dual approach of conservation as well as also protecting access for all of our users who love to be out on the water in a safe and sustainable way. And so excited to talk a little bit more about that here over the next hour.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay, our next panelist is Elliot Horowitz. He is the founder and CEO of Viam. It's an AI company. And he's going to talk a little bit about how do we get that open, how do we get those data? How do we able to translate information that's coming to us in various ways and be able to get it to the user? So Elliot.
Yeah. Thanks, Holly, for having me, and really excited to be here. And just going back in time a little bit, we came here and we got into this space through a long, convoluted story. We started, I've been diving and fishing for 35, 40 years, and have really sort of loved the water for my entire life. Kind of left the water for a while, started a company in the data space, got busy. 15 years later, left that company and was like, great, let's go out on the water again. Let's start diving again. Let's start doing all these things on the water again. And you start thinking about the water again, this is about 5 years ago, and you immediately start thinking about cleaning oceans and pollution and all the things you want, sustainable fishing, all these things become front and center immediately. Having a lot of free time on my hands, I started thinking about how technology can start improving things. People aren't going to go and remove plastics from the oceans. People aren't going to go and sort of start fixing all these problems that we actually want to solve. And we need more tools, we need more solutions. So we started looking at that space. So that turned into this new company, VM, which is all about building an operating system for physical AI. So what does that have to do with the oceans? So quite a bit. So we do a lot of different things in the oceans today, around data, around cleaning. We work with the Billion Oyster Project we were talking about earlier, which is helping to plant oysters in New York Harbor to clean oceans, to clean the water in New York Harbor. Then we get into more interesting things. Holly mentioned bycatch earlier. We're working with one of the leading sonar manufacturers that helps commercial fishing fleets find fish, and we're putting AI on the sonars in order to actually reduce the amount of bycatch. So rather than sort of accidentally catching things you don't, being able to intelligently target exactly what you want and only catch those things so you do less damage. We're doing a lot of work in areas like manufacturing. We're working with some of the big boat builders on automating the sanding process of fiberglass. Right? Fiberglass manufacturing can be messy and dangerous. If you can make that more intelligent and easier, that's great. A lot of these things are all built towards how do you get more people on the water and make the water better. Talking more about data specifically, we think there's another massive opportunity there. We'll come back to waves in a second, but if you think about just ocean data, right, the oceans are still incredibly unknown. So one of our customers, we just built a new system with them. And what we can do now is on every single boat in their fleet, and they've got about 500 customers right now using their products and growing pretty quickly, we have real-time sea information from every one of these boats. So wave height data, sea temperature from all of these boats all over the East Coast. So I think we've got actually an incredible source of information about literally sea conditions everywhere from New York Harbor through all the canyons in the East Coast all the way down to the Bahamas. So real-time sea temperature that is streamed in real time from boats back to our cloud and then pushed back out to all these boats so people know where to go safely. You can do weather predictions off of these things and actually understand what's going on. And I think one of the things that's really cool is that as connectivity gets better, we can take all this data that's on these boats, and every new boat has an incredible electronics package, a lot of them powered by Brunswick, that have tons of data coming off of it, sort of just sitting on the boat wasted. And one of the things that we focus on is getting this data, bringing it into the cloud, and making use of it. And this data could be everything from sea temperatures to wave height data to the cameras looking for things, the radar, sonar, bringing it to the cloud, using it for really interesting things, whether it's avoiding whales or just understanding ocean weather better, and then pushing that information back to the people who need it, whether it's in real time back to the boats or to the scientific community who's trying to figure things out. And so that's what we're here, and we're really excited about it.
Excellent. Awesome. I already got questions for you. I have to wait. Okay, next we have Taylor Shropshire. He's with Phantom Science. Taylor's going to talk about the use of data models. So once you start to gather all that information, how do you do some predictive tools, right? Where are the whales going to be? Where are the fish going to be? So Taylor's going to give us an overview of that.
Yeah, thanks, Holly. I'm glad to be here this morning. I think, this is a great segue to talking about models. One thing I like to highlight when we think about ocean models or ocean forecasting is think about the weather. So we rely on weather forecasts for so many decisions. But the reality is that there's so many more sensors on land. It's much easier to understand what the conditions are like for weather compared to the ocean. Models are really important for us to understand what's going on. So again, my name is Taylor Shropshire. I am an oceanographer and founding member of Fathom Science. Fathom Science is an ocean forecasting and marine data analytics company. And so I think on this panel, we kind of represent more of the startup. The company was founded in 2018 by a group of researchers in the oceanography department at NC State University. And in 2024, early 2024, we spun out of the university. And during our time at the university, we spent many years developing ocean models to study currents, waves, marine ecology. But we wanted to do more than just write papers. And when we looked at some of the largest marine industries, we saw that there's this lack of reliable ocean forecasts. So our primary focus to date has really been to develop ocean forecasts for maritime, so specifically shipping and port operations. And anytime you talk about marine conservation, especially on a global scale, you have to talk about shipping, right? So shipping accounts for 80% of global trade, and marine traffic will only continue to increase into the future. And so as a result, we're seeing more vessel strikes, and this has been a particular concern on the US East Coast, where we're all located here now, for the North Atlantic right whale. And this is despite the fact there's been many great efforts by federal agencies and others to try to reduce risk. This is also despite the fact that there's many websites that exist to show recent whale sightings. But we feel like, from our perspective, we really need to go a step further. So that's what we're trying to do at Fathom Science. We've developed a tool called Whalecast, which is trying to make forecasts of risk on the water. So we use tens of thousands of historical sightings. We can go back in time with our model and look and see what the conditions were like at each one of those sightings. What was the temperature like? What were the currents like? The depth, the salinity. As many pieces of information we can pull from the environmental model, and then basically build a machine learning model to identify the highest risk conditions. And then we simply combine that with our forecast for the day and to try to predict where there's risky conditions. And before I go further, I think it's really important to note that federal agencies know we're definitely not trying to replace the federal management of North Atlantic right whales or other marine mammals. We just think that the private sector can come alongside and provide innovation, which is one of the main topics for today. We've seen that a lot of the efforts to date have been to develop these models for management applications and for scientific research, and there's a very little data flow that is going towards actual mariners. And commonly there's a question, well, how are you going to make people use data on the water? And our answer would be, you can't make people use data on the water, but we think it's responsible to at least provide people information about risk in their area, so that they can make decisions that hopefully reduce that risk. So really what I'd like to highlight today in this discussion is, predictive modeling, I think, is an important piece of the puzzle for at least the whale conservation angle, but it's not a silver bullet. There are many considerations and challenges with how do you get this information out to people. We're speaking to some of the major marine electronics companies like here to make it convenient. It's not just another app. We want the data to be front and center to people, to make it accessible. And there's challenges with, if you have a model that predicts where whales are likely to be to avoid them, then it would be pretty easy to think about people using that same technology to potentially harass whales. So we're not naive to that, and that's why we think public-private partnerships are really important. We can create these new innovations, but we don't want to do anything contradictory to what NOAA or other federal agencies are trying to do. Our main goal is to supplement that information and ultimately make incremental changes to reducing risk. So that's what I'm here to talk about today, and excited to continue the conversation.
Great, thank you, Taylor, so much. Okay, rounding out the panel is Josh Greer. He's the Sustainability Program Manager at Yamaha Motor Corporation USA, and he's going to speak to some of this new technology and how it plays into his company, but also, how companies are also advancing new technology around the angle of sustainability.
Definitely. Thank you, Holly. So as Holly said, my name is Joshua Greer. I'm the Sustainability Program Manager for the Marine Division of Yamaha Motor. For those of you who may not be familiar, Yamaha Marine produces some of the highest quality marine products in the world, whether that's outboards, vessels, wave runners. It's a little bit of everything. Yamaha Marine's a subsidiary of Yamaha Motor. We also manufacture motorcycles, side-by-sides, ATVs, basically anything in an engine with it that you can go and have fun with. Yamaha does it. And if you're not familiar with any of our Yamaha Motor products, you're probably familiar with our sister company, Yamaha Music. So there's very few places where you're a one-stop shop where you can buy a piano and an outboard in the same place. So if it's not one thing, it's usually the other. So as part of my job at Yamaha Marine, I basically break my duties down into one of two places. One is either supporting our carbon neutral activities. Yamaha Marine has a commitment of carbon neutrality for Scope 1 and Scope 2 by 2035 and Scope 3 by 2050. So I've been involved in anything from industrial refits of coming up with ways to save energy and fuels at our manufacturing facilities, as well as installing solar installations at some of these same places and at our corporate offices. The other side of it is leading our Yamaha Right Waters program. So I always like to say that Yamaha Marine's been involved in sustainability activities for as long as we've been around, but we haven't always done a good job of bringing it all together under one brand. So that's where Yamaha Right Waters was created in 2019. And to kind of help guide what sustainability means for Yamaha Right Waters, we have 4 founding pillars. The first one is supporting academic marine research. The second is combating the spread of invasive species. The third is creating and restoring marine habitats, and the fourth is encouraging proper marine stewardship. Now, those 4 pillars are kind of the guiding principles, but the kind of projects and relationships that we have are incredibly diverse and can take on a number of different kind of shapes and sizes. One that I think meshes really well with the kind of the panel and what we're talking about today is our relationship with Georgia Southern. We're in the middle of a research project with Georgia Southern University, Georgia DNR, and a nonprofit known as Shell to Shore, basically looking at restoring degraded oyster beds on coastal Georgia marshes and examining the potential for those oyster beds to contribute to carbon sequestration. Now, I'm one who always likes to see where things can kind of build on top of each other. Oyster beds have long been known to be an excellent fish habitat. They also contribute to the economic success of working coastlines, which I know has been a really common topic that's come up at this event so far. And if we can kind of combine win after win, not only sequestering carbon dioxide, but creating habitat and contributing to coastal economies, I think that's an excellent way of using what might be considered old tech, restoring a oyster bed that should have been there for hundreds of years, with kind of our new understanding of how these things that have been around for a long time can contribute to problems that we're experiencing. Another one that I'd like to highlight, and one that I'm sure my fellow panelists will probably spend a lot of time talking about, considering that all of us are contributing to it, is the Whale and Vessel Safety Task Force vessel. WAVES, fun little acronym for you, has been around for a couple of years now, and it's basically a conglomeration of private organizations, nonprofits, and some government organizations who are all working together on emerging technologies to figure out how we can help reduce the amount of negative interactions with whales and vessels. And I had the pleasure of going out on that vessel earlier this week. You know, it's been kind of on the drawing board for a little over a year now, and to kind of see it all come together and see all those technologies on that vessel was truly incredible. There's a lot of systems there that have never been brought together on a vessel before, let alone one of that size. And to kind of see how it all comes together it's been truly amazing.
That's really good. Thank you. Thank you, Josh. So this was really good, insightful input and introductions from each of the panelists. It generates a couple questions that I have, and I'd like to start. I think maybe I'll open it up, or Anya, maybe you could be the first to address it. But there's a lot of new technology out there. What is the reception of users on new technology? Is it, you know, I mean, you go from like predictive tools to crowdsourcing. How trustworthy do you feel users are that are using your products, and like how is that getting into the market? And are people receptive to it, or do they want to go back to the paper charts and, you know, information that they're getting from their buddy who was just fishing in the same spot?
Yeah, so I would start by saying that there is a ton of technology on every new boat that we manufacture and sell today. And so a big part of what we're doing as we think about conservation here is leveraging a lot of those technologies that are going to be on the boats anyway and driving more integrated systems, interoperability, kind of standardized communication protocols so that we can add more features and functions to those existing technologies. So from my perspective, leading the Navico organization, we make multifunctional displays. So the screens that are in your boat are in place in most boats today anyway. You know, brands that we have would be Simrad, Lowrance, B&G, CMAP. We can use those multifunctional displays that people are using all the time anyway to display additional information. So when we have more predictive alerts and warnings to say caution, it is, you know, there's certain circumstances that mean that there's likely to be whales in this region, we can pop up those alerts in real time on the multifunctional displays that are already there. We've also for a long time had AIS, for example, on the boats. We have radars on the boats that are kind of, you know, looking longer distances. We have sonars and transducers that are looking shorter distances. We have thermal cameras. So we have a lot of these technologies on the boats already. And so really what we're doing here as we think about further conservation applications is leveraging those technologies, having all the different systems work together and use that to provide the predictive alerts as well as the real-time, hey, a whale was spotted over here, so avoid this area. So I think the adoption is pretty good. A key, I think, is making it all very interoperable and making it really, really intuitive. That's a big piece of it, is that it has to be easy for the consumers. To drive adoption, it has to be easy. And so that's a lot of what we're focused on in the MFD space.
Elliot?
Sure. So the way we think about it is all these things can be used for many purposes, from, you know, getting data to academics to government agencies. And we see really great adoption and excitement when there are very tangible things that people get at the same time. So for example, a couple of things that we've seen that we help people do that really drive things quickly. One is sort of the wave data we were talking about before, seeing real-time sea conditions so you know where to go and where it's safe. Two is real-time inlet depth. So for example, in Long Island or New Jersey, a lot of the inlets are kind of dangerous. After a storm, things shift. So we can actually show real time where boats like you have gone before, you know, not like 2 weeks ago, but like in the last 24 hours. So you know, oh, if I take this path, it's safe. And so it's all about adding these features in that actually are really exciting, that are displayed on the MFDs. So you don't have to put new things in there. You don't have to have your phone out, making it, again, really easy, but adding real value. And then having some really fun ones, like we hooked up some of the, I think it was actually some Brunswick cameras that actually have pretty good optical zoom, and you can point them up and you can get a star chart overlay on them so you can see what you're zooming in on. And it's all just making it fun and easy, and then at the same time, you get a lot of value. Because a lot of boaters they like paper charts. They don't want to be tracked. They don't want their friends to know where they're going to fish. And so you've got to really get them excited to be like, great, if I do this, I get a lot of benefit out of it also.
Great. Others?
Yeah,
Taylor?
I can build on that. So from our perspective, I think that there's some tension sometimes from like the boating community or mariners that, there's regulations which are important, but sometimes it doesn't feel like they're being given the opportunity to like contribute also. And that's kind of what, with what we're doing with Whalecast, we want to empower mariners to be able to make decisions on the water that reduce risk. And I think people are much more receptive when they feel that they're being given the opportunity to contribute. So to answer your question, Holly, I would say that it's been fairly, a high level of reception to wanting new tools to do their part. Kind of compare it to like thinking about, let's say, speed. When you're driving on the highway, some people go way over the speed limit, right? But then there's people that do want to be safer and they want to do their part. Well, we're trying to give information of what is this, essentially what is the safest areas to go and that sort of information. So I think there is a lot of reception to adopting new technologies. I think the larger challenge is how do we ensure that these technologies come alongside what federal agencies are already doing, and we don't create conflicts for what they're already doing, or we're conflicting information. That's where I see the larger challenge.
Josh, do you have anything to add, or?
Yeah, I think in kind of the simplest terms, I think that when it comes to acceptance of these kinds of new technologies, a lot of people in the boating space have done things a certain way for a really long time. They are very ingrained in their ways, but they love toys.
Yeah.
And if you can make a technology seem cool, and I love what they talked about earlier as far as feeling like they're contributing. Our customers range all the way from someone who it's their first boat ever. Maybe they've always thought about getting on the water and they're thrilled to go out there for the first time, or a charter captain who spends 300 days on the water all year round. And what we try and bring together out of that really wide customer base is making sure that a product is accessible and that it makes boating easier or more fun. And when we have these kind of technologies that are dedicated to, detection and communication and safety, I think that everyone really wants to do the right thing. So if we can make it as easy and as interesting for them as possible to do so, I think that's going to lead to the highest chance of acceptance.
Nice. So one thing I've learned is if I'm having a party, I'm having Josh. It sounds like a lot of fun. Music, toys, all those good things. I do want to probe a little bit, Taylor, what you mentioned is working with the federal agencies, right? So you have NOAA, and the good thing at the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, we're working very closely with NOAA and with WAVES, and providing grants to support new technology. And that program actually is engaging both nonprofits and for-profit. And it's also engaging the federal agencies. So it's really bringing people together to kind of test out technology. And I think that's very important. If you're going to create something, you want people to use it. And if people are going to use it, you want the federal agencies to also understand it and support it, because they're going to be the ones regulating or overseeing. So Taylor, a question for you is, in your development, how have you been engaging with the federal agencies in your technology, and also just what you're seeing in terms of vessel avoidance and whale detection?
Yeah, well, I think we're building upon a lot of prior efforts. So with what you're talking about federal agencies or in the academic space, developing models that predict where whales are, or habitat suitability models, is not a new concept. So we're simply trying to just take another step. I think you have to demonstrate the value first to really get the ear of the federal government, and that's what we're pursuing right now. I think we're really getting to that place where we need more of that input now more than ever. So we've kind of developed a prototype we've validated the model, and now it comes down to, okay, who do we engage, and how do we navigate this relationship? Because it can be somewhat awkward where there's different agendas, right? In private space, obviously, for-profit companies are doing things, whereas government is having a different agenda. And so coming together and building trust, I think, that the person that you're sitting across the table from is a company that is developing technology that they truly want to come alongside and supplement the approaches that are being done by the federal government. That piece is really important to doing greater engagement.
Exactly. Elliot, you have to access information. And obviously there's a lot of open source data out there. What is your engagement in terms of the federal information and some of the open source data, and how are you pulling that down and combining it with some of the AI and other data that you're gathering and collecting?
Yeah, so so for example, when you think about sort of one of our customers has an app that combines sort of, again, real-time wave information, real-time sea information, real-time depth information from boats in their fleet about inlets and things like that. They also are obviously then pulling all the data largely from NOAA and all those agencies around existing charts, existing data, and sort of overlaying around it and seeing what's changed so you can sort of understand and alert people. So that's an example of things we're doing. So far, we have not found great channels to push any of that data back. It's something that we were sort of actively looking at, and one of the reasons why we're here. But it's pretty much we've been pulling a lot of this data, and then we'd love to sort of figure out how to get it out there. I think one of the ones that the wave data, for example, and the sea conditions data, great for weather modeling. That's one, and then the inlet data. This is one that I care a lot about because water safety and whether you can actually navigate safely is a pretty important factor in boating, and we'd like that to be available to everyone, right? Maybe not all the data, but at least get all the data around inlets that are known to be hazardous. Let's make sure that everyone who wants that has access to that data and make it really, really easy. So I think there's a huge opportunity there that we're just barely scratching the surface of right now.
Okay. I have a couple other questions, but I was wondering, anything coming in from the audience I'll take.
Maybe I just
yes, please go.
Just while you're pulling those up, I think it's also, from my perspective, important that we're thinking of these things as complementary. So what government agencies are doing, and either the skills or the capabilities or the resources or the technologies that we can have, really thinking about them as complementary to what we're doing together. So taking the data, presenting it to the user in a intuitive, easy, actionable way in order to support the aligned agenda, I think is a really important part about how we think about how we all work together.
Okay, I have a couple questions I'm going to start. I think this kind of falls into some of the stuff we've just been talking about, and it applies to everybody. And Elliot, maybe you could start because it is talking about data, and people are asking, are the data open? Is it accessible? And if not, how do you make it accessible to everybody?
So I think it's a very big topic with a non-obvious answer, which is, I come from a place of whoever creates the data tends to own it, right? So the boat owner should get to decide what happens with their data. They may work with a company who has access to that data and be able to do with it, and they should be able to do something with that data and share it with other people. And so I think this is where having partnerships and working together becomes critical. I don't think it's easy to just take all data from all boats and make it completely open. You get into a lot of privacy issues, a lot of security issues that you just really can't get into. There's been Netflix made a mistake almost 20 years ago about, we can anonymize some data simply and then open it up to researchers and no one will know what was going on, and people reverse engineered in about 3 days who liked what movies. And maybe you don't want to let people know that. And so you have to be able to share data and let people use that data for lots of good things while not invading anyone's privacy. And so I think this gets tricky. There are ways to do it, but it does require a lot of partnerships between lots of different organizations, government organizations, the actual boat owners who really want to understand what's going on and want to make sure no one's tracking what they're doing, and no one knows where they went last Sunday. And so that is sort of a complex thing. And again, we're just scratching the surface. I think there's a lot to do there. We have a lot of data in our system that is just sitting there. And I know we'd love to help people use it, but at the end of the day, it's also not ours. It's our users, it's the boat owners, it's our customers. So we want to enable them to work with agencies and make it a really easy and safe thing to do, and make that helpful for everyone.
For the data that, the model data that we're providing, we think, it has to be accessible, and that's why we've been talking to some of the largest marine electronics companies. If you want to get in front of boaters, the people on the water, it has to be done in a direct way. It can't be another app people are pulling up on their phone. So I think that part of how to get the data to people, how do you make it accessible, that is a key part of that story. Yeah.
So there's the native apps, which is kind of presenting the data to the people. I think one interesting angle to the data that boats, personally owned boats, are capturing is this is where, for us, with our Freedom Boat Club shared access model, we have a little bit of a different ability to do things. So in those cases, we own the boats, and as long as the people who are taking the boats out on the water will sign a waiver to say, when I take this boat, we're also going to be capturing your information and using it and sharing it. And so and then we have access to that data, and we can use it, to do things like capture sea states or points of interest, or where we've seen particular marine species. And so that actually is something we are doing. Obviously, we still need the users to agree to that, but it's kind of part of their contract terms. When you take this boat out, you're agreeing to this. So that is one way of enabling us to get a little bit more access to the real-time user-generated data.
So I have a general question, and it could be for anybody, and I think it's a good question, is that technology is being used and created, which is really important, but give us an example of how it is avoiding wildlife. How is it avoiding turtles and whales? And what is the technology? We talk about technology. Can someone give an example? What is that technology that is being uploaded onto the screen for the user to be able to make decisions?
So I can share a little bit from our perspective. So primarily we're talking about sensing data, right? So the sensors are the things that are going out there and seeing what they see. And so there's a few different things that enable us to do that. One would be the radars, right? They can see long distances above the water. Another would be the thermal cameras. So the thermal cameras also have long range. These kinds of technologies are able to see, where whales are going to be based on blows or whatever, and then can feed that data back in real time. We have, of course, the GPS and the AIS systems that are telling you where the boat is and what kind of boat that is, what size it is, what speed it's going at, what direction it's going at. So that's another aspect of the specific technologies that are seeing the data. And then kind of underwater, but with a more limited range, would be things like sonar that can see specific fish under the water. I know that's an area that VIAM has been involved into. They can see the fish under the water. They can identify the species of the fish. They can identify the direction of travel. So those are some of the specific technologies from the sensing side.
The way I think about it is, great captains on the water from the right vantage point are very good at seeing what's in front of them and not hitting things. The problem is that you've got a lot of people who aren't great. And so the way I think about AI is, how do you up-level the people who aren't great and make them better? Right, so one of the things we're focused on is using the tools that are already there, thermal cameras, even just regular cameras, which are probably at least as good as sort of human sensing capabilities, and making sure that there's enough AI on the boats so that you can actually have those cameras to take those, let's call them mediocre captains, and make them as good captains at avoiding things. Right? If a great captain can see a turtle, then a mediocre captain should be able to use AI to make sure they can see the turtle and not hit it. And I think that's sort of the way to think about it.
In our case, the technology is really, I guess the way it kind of presents itself is as a data layer on the actual MFD. So think about like a heat map that shows you, okay, this area is high risk, this area is low risk. So this is not currently being used, but we are on a path to getting this out in front of people. We're trying to make sure to take the necessary steps to make sure that the data is used in the right way, as I mentioned. But that, for our point of view, that's how the technology is an example of the technology is a predictive modeling. And one advantage we see with this particular part of I would say the risk reduction chain, is that it's very scalable. So thermal cameras are great, but they're also very expensive.
Yeah.
And so how are you going to get that on all different boats? What we're trying to do is make a a data layer, just like when people go out, they check the weather on on their MFD. They could check and look at what the risk conditions look like in the area that they'll be in for the day. So that's how technology, I think, is, or an example of technology, to answer your question, really can impact people's decision making on the water and hopefully reduce the opportunity to have strikes.
One of the things I think that's beautiful about that, and it came up a couple times just in that conversation, is the fact that, there's a lot of information that's being gathered. There's a ton of different ways to gather that data, but making sure that it's communicated and shared in a way that is accessible to people of every level of boating, and making sure that we're not just relying on someone who has, several decades of experience, because everyone should be able to go out and enjoy the water. So if we can make it to where these detection technologies can keep people safe regardless of their level of experience, and we can communicate it in a way that it's as open source as possible, I think we're going to make sure that people have a much better, safer time on the water regardless of how long they've been around.
So, question for the audience, by show of hands, how many of you ever used Waze, like to get around on the highway, street, you put it in to go home? So that in its sense is a form of crowdsourcing, but also AI, artificial intelligence, because it's calculating their best route and it can change on the fly. Sounds like very similar technologies being applied and trying to be adopted here. But a number of questions came in about a concern about AI, artificial intelligence, particularly the amount of energy it requires. And you're leading sustainability, but you have to balance that sustainability of using new technology with advancing for safety, and so you have this balance between protecting wildlife, protecting boaters, at the same time using technology that many in the community feel that it's hard to sustain. You're creating an issue here for the environment where you're helping the environment over here. So I was curious, does anybody have thoughts on that? Because that's definitely, a lot of people feel that way, and just wanted to get a sense.
So I'll start. So I think the first thing to think through is that AI means a lot to a lot of people and nothing to almost anyone. So when people think about that and they're thinking about sort of newer AI companies, like really big models, you've got OpenAI and Microsoft and Google and Facebook all competing to make these really, really large models that are supposed to be smarter than everyone. I don't know your experience, they're kind of smart, they do some things. That is a small piece of what AI is, right? If you have an iPhone and you use Face ID to log into your phone, that's AI. Yep. Uses basically no power, right? It's running on your phone. The AI we're talking about to look at camera feeds on boats to look for things is running on the existing hardware that's already on boats. It's not really big models being trained. And so I actually think this is an important topic, but I think it's actually not as big of a deal in this space, because it really is about empowering AI on boats and on small devices in the field and making it, and that is not actually a problem. Now, I think the big models in that, it could be a problem, but I think that's actually pretty different than what we're talking about here. But I think the AI topic is actually so large and so convoluted, it's actually really hard to piece it together right now. One of the things we think a lot about is how do you enable small and mid-sized organizations to create their own AI models using very small amounts of power that can run on devices with small amounts of power and make that actually usable by everyone, right? Enabling teams to, great, maybe NOAA wants to create their own AI model for detecting whales on cameras. They should be able to do that cost effectively using resources they already have, not using massive data centers that require, I don't know how much power, ridiculous amounts of power, and running on small devices that are already on boats. And I think that's sort of the way we have to think about AI going forward, and not these sort of massive, massive data centers that consume all the energy on the planet.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Other input into that?
No, I 100% agree. I mean, what we're talking about here is not generative AI, right? It's the use of, CV, computer vision, machine learning. I think we all use it today, both in our phones, but even every car you drive has a camera in that front dash, right above your mirror, that is helping you with automatic emergency braking and with emergency steer assist. It's kind of similar technology that we're talking
For the
about
boats.
here.
Yeah,
for
vessels.
boats. It's sensing objects that are out there and identifying what those objects are. The actual processing power to do that is nowhere near the same level as what we think about when we think of large language models and generative AI.
Very good. Great. Okay, another question. What are okay, hold on. Put my glasses on. Jesus. Okay. What are the challenges and benefits you're encountering when working with the conservation community, particularly state, local, federal agencies, and then thoughts on how to improve? That's a good question. So again, what are your challenges, but also the benefits you are encountering when working with the conservation community, and particular state, local, federal agencies, and in thoughts for improvement?
I would say from a challenges point of view, it's just the fact that there's a lot of really good people and a lot of really good missions and not enough resources to go around. Mm-hmm. So you end up having to try and come up with a criteria that helps you evaluate these partnerships. And it says, okay, well, maybe at this point, this is what we can do for you, but stick around, and as your mission kind of evolves and you start to see progress, come back and talk to us again and we'll see what we can do. As far as benefits go, I think they're innumerable. Yamaha Right Waters has done a ton of work with federal, state, nonprofit, anyone and everyone in between, universities. The amount of excitement that I get and that I see when I get to work with these people who this is their passion every day is immense. When I was an undergrad, I was a researcher. I did sand dune ecology research. And I remember having to go around and beg for grant money. So getting to kind of be on the other side and getting to help people with this kind of passion and determination to fix the world and save any number of problems has been amazing. You get to see collaboration in ways that you would never assume was possible. But if you can get people from a university, a government organization, a private enterprise, and anyone in between, community organizations. We work with HOAs sometimes. It's crazy, right? You get a lot of people behind the same cause and you can accomplish almost anything.
I think for us, the WAVES task force is a good place where we're seeing both the benefits and some challenges. So the audience, if you haven't looked at the Whale and Vessel Safety Task Force, please check it out. We're doing some great things. And I think really it was based off of the idea of, okay, there's all of this great technology for avoiding whales, and there's also this solution that the government is trying to look at as far as reducing vessel speed. And so there was this kind of some conflict for a little while around the industry and the vessel speed rule. And so I think there's some maybe mistrust of different agendas, as I've kind of brought up. But since that speed rule has been withdrawn, WAVES is still there. We know this issue is not going away. So in that sense, I think the benefit we've found is now starting to build that trust and to get more of that buy-in from federal agencies, and to see that this public-private partnerships has a lot of value. But again, the challenge is always to build that trust and continue it. So WAVES is a great example of that question.
No, I would reiterate that, and I think that word trust is really, really important, right? I think when we actually talk to each other and we understand what is our goal and what are our incentives, we find that there actually is pretty good alignment. Nobody wants to hit a whale, I can 100% guarantee you that. And certainly no recreational boat, because that is not going to end well for anyone. And so I think that has been the key, and WAVES has been very, very successful in bringing the stakeholders together to build the trust and to understand that we do have this aligned incentives, and also then to leverage the capabilities that each of the different stakeholders bring. So, from Brunswick and Navico side, we have a whole bunch of electronics engineers that are expert in MFDs and in sensors, et cetera, et cetera. We don't necessarily have the same deep technical knowledge on some of the other aspects that, for example, NOAA can bring to the table. And so just getting those groups together to talk and to share what skills and capabilities we have and how we can use those together to build the best solution overall, I think has been a real success story with WAVES.
So as someone who spent 15 years at NOAA, and then before that academia, and then now in the nonprofit world working with industry, it's very important that we have public-private partnerships. And NOAA and other federal agencies have been at the forefront of really building that trust and alliance and bringing people to the table. But we're in a very interesting time right now where the federal agencies are at risk. They're being impacted with funding reductions, and particularly NOAA. And in order for this to work, we need a public-private partnership. We need both sides of the house to make this work. And now that NOAA has some uncertainties, but the community on the corporate side is engaging and is now building that trust and working together, I feel like it's tipping a little bit. And so I guess the question I have for you is, with NOAA and other federal agencies right now in some uncertain waters, how does that affect your work and your ability to move forward? And what can the corporate community do to ensure that our collaboration and our trust continues to move forward?
I mean, first and foremost, I think we can continue with things like the Waves Task Force and make sure we are continuing to focus on these topics. I think we were talking a little bit earlier about we are all incentivized in general to protect our oceans, right? For industry in terms of to help support recreational boating. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's key for us that as things change in the political landscape, for us to continue to focus on the long-term vision, which really is to protect our resources for long-term future and use for future generations.
I think one of the key things to do is take the issues that are very focused on certain aspects of conservation and then expand them into more interesting things that are broader. So Anya said, no recreational boater wants to hit a whale. Right. Completely true. No recreational boater wants to hit a shipping container or a gas tank or an old fishing net that's in the water, all of which happen all the time. And so you mentioned, Holly, ways for cars, right? There should be ways for boats. Something that some of people we know are working on is make it easy for people to crowdsource, hey, there is something you don't want to hit over here. It could be a whale, it could be a log, it could be ropes, right? Then you could actually start triggering people to go find them, and if it's a rope, clean it up. If it's a whale, not to go in that area. But crowdsourcing the data to make it easy, right? Waze has been particularly successful at letting people avoid things they don't want to avoid. We don't need to talk about what. And we need to do the same thing on the water. And I think that's, broadening to, okay, we don't want to hit whales, but let's make it more broad. Let's actually expand it to all the things you don't want to hit in the water. And I think that's how you get the user value up really high, and that's how you can get people really excited about building these tools that help everyone.
I think private-public partnerships right now has the greatest opportunity because there has been a trimming of the federal government. There's a greater need for more help to meet the same deliverables. And I think we're sorely mistaken if we think that individual companies are going to somehow organize together to deliver that same service. Right. So, although, the federal government's much smaller now, I think there's a lot more opportunity to say, okay, how can we work together? And ultimately, I think that could be a great thing for the future.
I think that in the end, we want a lot of the same things, right? We were talking about earlier, and it's come up several times in previous sessions, we all want to make sure that our oceans are happy and healthy for generations to come. Just because government has taken a smaller role recently doesn't mean that mission has changed, right? We all want what's best for the environment so that our kids and our kids' kids can go out and enjoy the same kind of things that we have for generations. And I think that really Waves in and of itself is a great testimony of that. Mm-hmm. The vessel speed restriction rule proposal was pulled back, and yet Waves is more active than ever. We're still working towards this mission.
Yeah, working with, from my position now, working with federal agencies and with corporations, I think there's definitely concern a lot. You mentioned earlier about getting grants, getting grants through the federal agency. And so seeing that being reduced, particularly from NOAA and other federal agencies, that's going to impact our ability to create these new technologies. The partnership we currently have with NOAA through our program is funded by NOAA, and so sustaining those resources are supporting corporations to develop technology to be able to be used for all users, for all ocean goers. So that can potentially be at threat. And that is resources that are generating non-federal support. Brunswick actually was a partner of ours as well, leveraging that federal NOAA money to make these grants happen and to bring these corporations together with federal agencies. So from my vantage point, yes, I'm very concerned about that, and we're doing everything on our part to make sure that we can help the federal agencies and corporations talk from the same song sheet, make sure we're supporting each other to help kind of sustain those resources going into the future. But other questions in terms of the just in general and in your philosophy around conservation. I have a couple questions come in to talk about what are your companies doing in terms of just conservation in general? Someone mentioned, I think Ellie mentioned about plastics. You initially got into this technology looking at reducing the impact of plastics on the oceans. Josh, your sustainability. So are there other aspects to conservation and preserving the environment around reduction in single-use plastics, or just in terms of other things your company's doing in support of the environment?
I'll start. So obviously still a smaller company and not a direct user of a lot of things, but one of the things we think a lot about, and one of the reasons why we started the company, was supply chain and manufacturing, right? If you think about sort of a lot of the waste and trash that we produce, and even pollution, is from very large supply chains, things being produced all over the world and shipped around, right? It's like 80% of marine traffic is commercial shipping. It's a lot. And if you start thinking about how you reduce those sorts of things and reduce waste over time, a lot of it is by, if most things you consume are made within 200 miles of where you live, the amount of waste goes down dramatically. And so we are doing a lot of work both in the marine space on marine manufacturing and in other manufacturing areas. How do you make that happen? Right? How do you use AI and robotics to actually enable manufacturing that's local manufacturing, that is reusable and flexible, so you're not just making everything out of plastic and having tons of shipping containers all over the place, and even just packaging that gets thrown away. And that's how we think about it. It's a little bit of a different angle on it, but we're very focused on that, right? Supply chains, manufacturing efficiency, even shipping efficiency.
I like to think that, I could have spent a whole hour up here talking about all the different ways that Yamaha charges different kinds of conservation. But some of the things that I'd like to highlight specifically is we're investing in the fuels of the future. We developed the world's first hydrogen-powered outboard engine. We are working on advocating for other sustainable marine fuels. I was at a lionfish tournament down on the Gulf Coast a couple weeks ago, counting and trying to get those delicious invasive critters out of our waters. We have an engine cover recycling program where we are taking covers from our boat builders and our dealers and feeding them in towards a gasification and pyrolysis process to make sure that those raw materials don't end up in a landfill somewhere, but that they end up getting fed back into the supply chain. There's so many different ways that organizations of every shape and size can get involved, and I think that our corporate philosophy is to stick by our 4 founding pillars and to explore any and every avenue that we can contribute.
That's great.
Just maybe from a Brunswick perspective, again, as a manufacturer, we really think of it in terms of scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 upstream and downstream. And so we have actions in all the various different areas. And so manufacturing processes that are more sustainable is definitely an important one there. And that's where things like zero waste to landfill and reducing water and renewable energy sources are important. As we think about more of the scope 2 and scope 3, that's things that are being used by the consumer, or scope 3. That's where we really think about more efficient propulsion systems, including electrification. We have a whole range of electric propulsion systems out there right now. There's still, because battery technologies don't have the same power density as, a gasoline propulsion system, that's not going to be appropriate for all use cases for some time, but that's where we then look at, sustainable fuels, and those have easier drop-in immediate actions. And then we also have done a lot of work on recyclable fiberglass hulls. In traditional manufacturing, those fiberglass hulls are not directly recyclable because there are multiple materials combined. You see, I'm sure many of you have seen derelict, abandoned vessels in waterways, and so we've done a lot of work thinking about and we have developed recyclable hulls that then now can be, not go to waste, to landfill, and can instead be reused in the future. So we kind of have actions across all the different scopes. Certainly, supply chain efficiency is a key piece of that. I think maybe just one other thing to mention is, because we are a company that is traded on the stock exchange and must deliver earnings, we think about a lot of these things in terms of value prop too, in terms of making sure that they are efficient as well. So the supply chain one is a great example. When we have a more efficient supply chain, not only is it helping with conservation and sustainability, but it's also cheaper, right? And so where we can find those win-win solutions as well, that is a great outcome.
Yeah, as I mentioned in my introduction, we come from, my company comes from an academic background, so conservation is kind of naturally on our minds a lot, and sometimes we have to say, okay, but how do you make money from this kind of question? But we have what we call a data for good portfolio, so we really want to maintain having some of our model forecasting products have applications that aren't necessarily focused on the dollar as much as, okay, this has a very obvious kind of application. And one of the other topics that we're looking into, other than whale vessel strikes, is marine plastics. So we have a project where we're using satellite imagery to actually do image detection analysis on large marine plastic patches in the ocean, and then tracking their movement with our models. This is not one-stop shop of a complete solution, but we think it's really important to be able to identify where these plastics are, where they're moving, before you can design efficient removal strategies. So we're actively working on that side of things right now.
So I went through most of the questions from the audience, and we're coming up to time, so I do have one final question I want to go with each of you. And I think it's really important to identify that you're all dependent on nature. You're dependent on, your businesses are dependent on a healthy ocean, a healthy blue economy. And so we're trying to do innovation in driving solutions for conservation, because for your companies to be sustainable, you have to have a healthy, clean ocean. And so I guess my question, and we can go down the line, is where do you hope with this technology and thinking about innovation and your work, where do you hope we are in 10 years from now when it comes to using this technology for conservation, using this technology to prevent whale strikes or other issues? So where do you hope we are 10 years from now, from your company's perspective, and the conservation of our coastal oceans?
10 years from now, I hope that we have identified, advocated for, and pushed a carbon neutral fuel so that we can take the existing fleet of internal combustion engine vessels and basically eliminate all emissions from them. I hope that the technology that the Waves Task Force is working on has evolved to the point where we can pinpoint and identify where any, I won't even be specific to North Atlantic right whale, where any marine obstacle, marine mammal, anything that could be damaged by boating activities, we know where they are and we can tell people not to go there. And in 10 years, I hope that the marine space catches up in sustainability to where so many other things like automotive have gone in the past couple of years. The common phrasing is that the marine industry runs about 10 years behind automotive, and I think that there's a lot of really talented people going into the marine space that can bring us up to par with them in the future.
Great.
So I agree with all of that, and I think one of the things that I think a lot about is what is actually going to make these things happen faster. So I live in New York. New York is an island that used to have an unbelievably great ecosystem around it, and it actually still does. There are whales an hour outside of New York City via boat, and if you ask most people in New York City if that was true, they would tell you you're crazy. When I tell people what you can see on the water in New York from New York City, they literally don't believe me. And one of the things I think about is how do we bring more people along, get more people excited about the water, about why educate people about why the oceans matter so much, and get them on the water and excited. Because what happens then is that people will actually care. And when people actually care about pushing this thing, that's when real change is going to happen. And technology is going to help that and make it easier and more, just better. But if you get people excited, things will happen quickly.
Anya?
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with that. I think one of the things that is top of my mind every day is increasing participation in our incredible, amazing, wonderful industry. I think we've probably all seen and heard the research just in terms of what being on the water can do for your mind and enabling you to calm and engage with other folks. And so if we can leverage these technologies and conservation and sustainability, as well as kind of intuitive solutions to really drive up participation in a safe and sustainable way so that a larger percentage of our overall population has the opportunity to enjoy being on the water every day, that for me would be the pinnacle of success.
I would be really excited to see in 10 years that we move from kind of this reactionary place to relying more on forecasted, information to make decisions from. So whether that's just understanding ocean conditions more, have weather forecasts be as popular as as ocean forecasts be as popular as weather forecasts and as accurate, and data being collected from boats that are out on the water, like Elliot's mentioned, having that data, what's called data assimilation, to actually make those models as accurate as possible. That would be really exciting, so that we're not flying blind so much sometimes out there on the water. We really have like very clear understanding of what the conditions are, how to react to them.
Fantastic. Well, I'm very, very thankful that you all took your time out today and that the audience took your time out today to attend this session. I am inspired that you have focused on natural systems and oceans, right? Oceans is part of your business, and you're focusing on how to make it healthier, better, cleaner, and sustainable for now and for the future. So I thank you very much for your time. And I thank the audience again for your questions and your attention to this. I think we have 1 minute to go to allow Joel to come back out and give us some final thoughts. So Joel.
All right, well, wow, I'm blown away by the discussion. I'm furiously taking notes backstage. I've got a lot of homework and a lot of research to do. I think we all learned a lot. And as you can see at this year's CHOW, we're diving deep into the advancements that really are part of this next wave. I'm going to share just a couple of quick notes because I was so motivated and inspired by the panel. I heard this message, a call to action, that our work in the marine space is maybe a little bit behind, and it's time to catch up, right? There are other industries, other sectors that have access to data and technology that we need to be leveraging, right? So I heard that. I heard a call to action that things like the Waves Task Force is underway, and we need to keep that going amidst great change in terms of the funding strategies of this administration. And so public-private partnerships are going to be more important than ever. But I also heard a lot of solutions. And that's a big part of the theme here at CHOW this year. Every year we talk about different subjects, and here at this CHOW we're talking about how we can advance technologies in the blue tech and the blue economy. So I want to say thank you to Dr. Bamford. Thank you to all of our panelists. That was fantastic. Thank you to the Viking Marine Group, Yamaha Motor Corporation, National Marine Manufacturers Association, Brunswick Corporation, VIME for sponsoring this session. We have some great virtual sessions going on. Please join those exciting conversations in our virtual session space. From strategy to action, how NOAA aims to put U.S. seafood on American plates. leading the way in a profitable and resilient future through investment in the ocean enterprise. Those are starting really shortly. The exhibit booths in the Sanctuary Cinema are packed. Go get your popcorn and treats at the Sanctuary Cinema. Take time to visit the sponsors during our lunch break. And in the Sanctuary Cinema, you can see a double feature, Stories from the Blue, Saving Kohala, about the heroes saving entangled whales, and of course, relive yesterday's presentation of Nia Bay, Restoring Ancestral Waters. There's going to be a special Q&A with Chairman T.J. Green. And we'll return at 1:15 for our next plenary, Fathoming New Depths, Ocean Discovery after the lunch break. Thank you all for being here, and we'll see you again shortly.